Pesachim Daf Beis briefly discusses three sugyas. First of all, the sugya of changing the place in which you're eating. Do you have to say a new bracha or not? Three-way machlokes, Amarayim on that, and a couple of proofs from a brisa. Then we have a brief mention of the old machlokes Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda about what happens if you're in the middle of eating a Suda and Shabbos begins. How do you take care of the cups that you have? Do you have to stop or not? And then the Gemara goes to discussion of, are you allowed to pile up a number of different mitzvahs together over one cup of wine? So first of all, we have a three-way machlokes Amarayim. What is the halacha? If you're in the middle of eating a Suda and you want to move to a different place, do you have to make a new bracha? And do you have to make a bracha achronim before you leave, or not? That applies both if you're moving somewhere else to continue there, or you're leaving and coming back. You have to make a bracha achrona and another bracha rishona. So there are three opinions. Rav Yechon says no, never. Rav Sheshes says yes, always. Rav Chisda says depends. Depends what you're eating. If you're eating something which requires a bracha achrona in its place, like for example something which requires an ala michya, or an ala eitz, or an ala gefen, or berchas and mazon. So any of those things, you do not lose the original eating. It still exists even when you move somewhere else or you leave, so you don't have to make another bracha. If, however, you're eating something which requires a burn of fashos, it doesn't require a bracha achrona in its place, and therefore you would have to make a new bracha if you go somewhere else. Make a bracha achrona before you leave, and make a new bracha achrona when you are ready to continue in the new place or when you come back here. So the Gemara has a proof against Rav Yochanan from a brisa. The brisa brings a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim, but none of them fit with Rabbi Yochanan. How so? Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim both agree that if you leave people behind when you leave a place, those people anchor you, you don't have to make a new bracha. That's fine. Nobody argues on that. But the machlokes where Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim argue is in a case where you do have to make a bracha achrona in this place. You're eating something which requires an al-michya or a berchas hamazon, and over there Rabbi Yehuda seems to say that you have to make a new bracha anyway, and the Chachamim say you don't have to make a new bracha. But one thing is clear, that if not for the factor that you are eating something which requires a bracha achrona, nobody would say that you don't have to make a new bracha. Everybody would say if not for that special factor that there's a bracha achrona that's required in its place, you definitely have to make a new bracha, and that is clearly against Rabbi Yochanan. So the Gemara says no, not necessarily. First of all, the Gemara says, what is the point in asking kasha on Rabbi Yochanan? We already had a solid unanswerable kasha on Rabbi Yochanan. We already rejected it. We already rejected him. So the Gemara says, okay, well, we want to see if we have another proof against him. And the Rashbam explains the reason we want it is because lest, say, somebody would come up with an answer to our previous proof, at least we still have this proof. So the Gemara says, no, Rav Yochanan is not going to be impressed by this proof. We'll still say that really this machlokes between Rav Yehuda and the Chachamim also exists in a situation where they were eating something that has to make a bar nefashos. Still, you would have the opinion of the Chachamim would still be that you do not have to make a bracha. You do not have to make a new bracha, even if it's bar nefashos food. If that's true, why did they only argue in the case of al-michya food or berchas hamazon food? So the reason why they chose that case is to tell you that even in that case, Rabbi Yehuda would still say you do have to make another bracha if you didn't leave over some people to anchor the Suda while you leave until you come back. So, to teach you the Chiddush of Rabbi Yehuda, we talked about that case. We're trying to discuss why is it better to teach the Chiddush, the more Chiddush case in Rabbi Yehuda, instead of the more Chiddush case in the Chachamim. But now, the Gemara says that there is another brisa, which is explicitly, even more explicitly than this, which is explicitly like Rav Chisda, and the brisa is very similar. Halacha, it says if a bunch of people are sitting and eating together and they were drinking wine, which is clearly something which requires an alagafen, and they left, and then they came back, you do not have to make another bracha, and this is clearly like Rav Chisda because it doesn't bring any machlokes, and it clearly discusses dafka case where they're drinking wine, but if it was something which didn't require a bracha in its place, then this brisa would not say that they do not have to make a new bracha, would say that they do have to, which is like Rav Chisda's opinion. Okay, now the Gemara leaves the sugi behind, and the Gemara goes back to a previous discussion of machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda, but what happens if you're in the middle of a Suda and Shabbos begins? So we had seen Rabbi Yehuda says you have to stop, and Rabbi Yossi says you can continue and make Kiddush afterwards. So the Gemara says, how does it work? So the Gemara says it's as follows. You bring 2 cups of wine. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you stop, you make kiddush right away, because you can't do anything until you make kiddush. You can't bench first, because you have to drink the wine of the benching, and you can't before you make kiddush. So you stop, on 1 cup you make kiddush, and then afterwards you bench, and that's it, Yisud is over. You don't continue. You just need to make, you're planning to bench now, you're stopping. But you have to make kiddush before you bench. Now, Rabbi Yossi says you can just keep going, so he'll say you keep finishing your Suda. Once the Suda is over, so in the first cup of wine, you could say Berachas Hamazon, bench first. There's no reason why you have to make Kiddush before you bench. Hare, you're continuing the Suda. And then after you bench, then you could say Kiddush to be aid to the mitzvah of Kiddush on Shabbos. So Gemara says, why do you need 2 cups? Why don't you just use 1 cup and say Berachas Hamazon and Kiddush over the same cup? So the Gemara says, no, you're not allowed to do 2 Kiddushos. You're not allowed to do 2 mitzvahs over 1 cup of wine because of a statement of Nachman bar Yitzchak, Ein oisin mitzvahs chavilas. You don't pile up mitzvahs on top of each other. That makes it seem as if it's a burden to you. You should take each one independently, separately. The Gemara says, is that really true? It's not true. We have a brisa that says if somebody comes home at Matzah Shabbos and he only has 1 cup of wine, so he says Havdalah, Bar Maria Eish, and Besamim on that cup, and if he has to bench, then he could throw them all over his shoulder, the Gemara says, the brisa says, and he could bench on that same cup of wine as well. So you see, you could do Berachas Hamazon and Havdalah on the same cup. So the Gemara says that's different there because he only has 1 cup. If he has 2 cups, then he shouldn't do that. He should have a separate one for Berachas Hamazon and a separate one for Havdalah and the attendant brachas to go along with it. So Gemara says, okay, I'll prove to you from a different brisa. Brisa discusses the halacha when Yom Tov falls out on Matzah Shabbos. You have to do Kiddush for Yom Tov and Havdalah for Shabbos. So Rav says the order is Yaknaha. Yain Kiddush Ner Havdalah. That's the order that you do it in. So Gemara says, so you see that you could do them both on 1 cup. Yain, Kiddush, Ner, and Havdalah. You could do Kiddush and Havdalah on the same cup of wine. And there's no reason to believe that he has less than 1 cup, that he has only 1 cup of wine. The Gemara says no, there is. Because why didn't it say Zman? What happened to Shechiyanu? Why did it say only Yaknaha? Obviously, it's talking about Shvi Shel Pesach, which is the only Yom Tov where you say Kiddush without Havdalah. So, that being the case, it's Shvi Shel Pesach, you probably only have 1 cup of wine left after a whole long Yom Tov, you only have 1 cup left, and that's why you can do them both over 1. The Gemara says no, still not correct. Because we have another discussion, we have a machlokes between Abaye and Rava, what the order is for Yaknahaz, when you do have to say Yain Kiddush Ner Havdalah and Zman. Abaye says it's Yakzina, Yain Kiddush Zman Ner Havdalah. First Bar Priagafen, then Kiddush, then Shechianu, then Ner, Bari Maria Eish, and then Besamim. And Rava says no, it's the way we do it Yaknahaz, Yain Kiddush Ner Havdalah Zman. So you see that we're talking about what you are saying is Zman. So it's not Shvi Shel Pesach. And therefore we assume you have plenty of wine, and yet you still do them both over 1. So Gemara says, okay, so I'll give you a different answer. Kiddush and Havdalah you can do over 1 cup of wine. Kiddush and Havdalah are very similar. They're both discussing the Kedusha of the Yom, and therefore you can do them over 1 cup of wine. Not only that, Kiddush when you do Havdalah between Shabbos and Yom Tov, you're going to be saying Hamavdal ben Kiddush l'Kiddush. So you're really being Mekadesh both at the same time. It's both a Kiddush and Havdalah in the same sentence. Berachas Hamazon to throw that on top, that's a whole different thing, and therefore we don't pile it on together because of mitzvahs chavilas.